Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure and a long expectation and hopefulness that we begin yet another season of Concert Conversations. I am so grateful that Maestro Mark Russell Smith, the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, has been able to share, as he so generously does, some of his time with us today. And Maestro, it's great to see. It looks like you've got a very great home office workspace there.
Thank you. Yeah, things are well. You don't see the floor, luckily. So I mean, there are things kind of strewn about the floor in various piles of music. But yeah, yeah. Thank you. It's great to be here. It is very exciting to start a Masterworks season, no question.
Well, we can't wait. And thank you so much. Before we get into this concert, let's talk a little bit about the season as a whole. I mean, we're starting off celebrating this fella from Bonn, Beethoven. I think you know. Well, there
Yes,
he
exactly.
is.
Yes. I just happened to have a bust. I was taken on my piano, and of course, this was my dad's growing up, and this was on our piano growing up. And it's not so heavy really, but it's you know big. It's big. It's big and bold as a Beethoven bust should be, as
Yes.
Beethoven's music is. So I just brought it down for brief, visual aid.
But there's something about it that really captures his spirit. I mean, my favorite one line description of him by a contemporary, actually, it was a nobleman, that referred to him as an unlicked bear. And there's some sort of wildness that comes in that bust.
Absolutely, and that's yeah. I mean, he was unbuttoned, as they say. Actually, I mean, he very moody, very. I mean, I wouldn't say unpretentious, but I would say not overly self-conscious, not overly self-aware as far as his interactions. I think he was super brusque with people, and of course his deafness and his kind of gradually checking out of the world due to his deafness played a big role in that. But it was also his nature to be kind of gruff and he had a small set of dear friends, and then who throughout his life who helped him and supported him, and then he had to play the game with rich people giving him money and playing this publisher against that publisher. And I mean, he needed to make sure that he was okay financially, because composers had to do that back then, and they were totally at the mercy of their patrons and the people to whom they dedicated music. And so Beethoven was very aware of that, and so was cognizant of what he needed to do kind of politically as best he could with his kind of limited social skills.
Well put. So, why is it that we're giving such emphasis to him in the first part of our Masterwork season?
Well, it's of course his 250th birthday. He was born in 1770, December 16th, 1770. And so therefore December 16th, 2020 will be his 250th birthday. And so again, we've talked about this in the past. I am very much kind of an anniversary guy, and we celebrated the 100th anniversaries of the Stravinsky ballets, and so it's when you have six programs and you construct a season, you look for kind of you look for overarching themes, and you look for things to guide you along the way, because there's so much repertoire that you could. I mean, there's just so many great programs out there and so much music that you to kind of have these things, these kind of things to grab onto is helpful. And so I mean, so therefore, thinking about Beethoven's 250th birthday, it's something that I knew was coming up, years and years ago, 3 years ago. So it's like, okay, well, we can save Beethoven 9. We can save the Beethoven Violin Concerto. We can, all these really great staples of the repertory that our Quad City Symphony audience wants to hear. It's a great excuse, to have that. And so the original season, the pre-COVID season had Beethoven 9, and it had Beethoven it had Beethoven Violin Concerto, and it had a Beethoven Piano Concerto. And so, in a way, that was just a tiny peek into Beethoven's world. I mean, only doing one symphony, one string concerto, and one piano concerto. It's given our six concerts, and given the balance, and given the size of the orchestra, and given all the other factors, that was how it worked out. And now that we had to go back and program for a smaller orchestra that can be socially distanced and fit on the stage of the Adler, and all the health parameters that we are very assiduously following, it gave us kind of it gave me a different excuse, or gave me a kind of different guidelines, and in a way really opened things up in a nice way, because like tonight's concert, or Saturday night or Sunday, whenever you're watching this, Beethoven's First Symphony is an incredible piece, and it's a piece that shows so much about where Beethoven came from, but still about where Beethoven was going. And it's kind of that perfect mix of picking up from his teacher Haydn, and then taking us to a different place like Eroica did. But the First Symphony is kind of hard to program for that very reason. I mean, they're Mozart symphonies, they're Haydn symphonies, it's kind of hard to find a slot for that. There's Beethoven 7, and there's Beethoven 9, and there's Beethoven 5. They're all the kind of the odd numbers, which are kind of the big showy ones, and so fitting number 1 in is kind of a challenge. And so it was a very welcome opportunity to explore the First Symphony and the Coriolan Overture. We can talk later about that, I guess. But we're able now to show a different side of Beethoven than we were earlier, and that's a great thing, I think. Making lemonade out of lemons, as they say.
Yeah, that's a mighty tasty lemonade.
Right.
We're going to get to the Beethoven works here in just a moment, but there's so much great music on this program. And I have to confess, I had not been familiar with the first work, managed to get my hands on a recording. It is sublime. So let's start, if we could then, by talking a little bit about Jessie Montgomery, a contemporary American composer who's
Right.
active, I think, in the New York area.
Correct.
Tell us how this came onto your programmatic radar. And I can't wait for audiences to hear this, because this will be one of 2 Quad Cities premieres, right?
Right.
The band.
Right.
So tell us how this came onto your radar.
Well, this came onto my radar through the Curtis Institute of Music, of course. Jessie Montgomery is an active violinist and composer. A dear friend of mine is a fellow African-American composer, fellow with Jessie Montgomery, Michael Abels, who has written a lot of music for the Sphinx competition. It's a string competition for string players of color, young string players of color. And it provides scholarships and performance opportunities. And anyway, so there's always a piece for the orchestra there, the Sphinx Orchestra. And I believe Banner was one of those pieces. It's originally for string quartet and string orchestra, and she has expanded it for chamber orchestra. We're doing the string quartet, string orchestra version. And the Sphinx competition regularly commissions composers like Jessie Montgomery, like Michael Abels, for new works that are part of the competition. This piece, Banner, happened to be, I forget what anniversary of the Star Spangled Banner. Is it 200th?
I know, I can't remember.
It was written, there was a big anniversary for our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. And so she is, a jazz player. She's she's a really versatile musician, all genres. And so basically she took the Star Spangled Banner, the tune that everybody knows and loves, and riffs on it in an incredible way, and throws in colonial tunes, throws in important national tunes. We have the rhythm of the Pledge of Allegiance, kind of that's put in kind of a chant-like way for strings. We have We Shall Overcome. We have some Civil War tunes. We have, just important American music that's all put together in this incredible potpourri and based around the Star Spangled Banner. And of course, we cannot stand and sing the Star Spangled Banner in our concerts. And so, that will be a change for our audience. As we always do, we come out and do the Star Spangled Banner, but we can't do that now because people can't sing. We can't sing out loud. It's a health hazard. And so this is kind of a perfect way to have the Star Spangled Banner, albeit people aren't going to sing, but the tune is there, and it's an incredibly talented African-American composer who, again, makes this beautiful combination of tunes from all throughout our history. And it's super energetic, and there's some, there's fiddling, and there's cool effects, and there's the drum line effect for the strings. I mean, it's like Americana. So many great things about American music, including marching band tradition, including those incredible historically back colleges with their drum lines. And I mean, it's just like it takes influence and suggestions from the American musical experience, and that's what makes it great.
Well, I did check, and it was 2014, because that was the 200th anniversary of Francis Scott Key's Star Spangled
Well,
Banner
there you go. The
at the end
poem.
of the
The poem.
War of 1812. And
Right.
she's also engaged, I think you may be aware, with the New York Philharmonic in another anniversary celebration, and that is celebrating the 19th Amendment and women's right
Right.
to vote. So
Right.
she's working very closely with the New York Philharmonic. But this notion of taking something um, familiar and giving us new appreciations, what I really like about that is, when we occasionally hear early American composers, we very often hear them sort of aping European sensibilities.
Right.
And then along comes Dvorak, who takes some, says, no, you've got some great music here. Let me just do this to it, right? And sort of gives us, hey, it's okay for us to do our own thing. But what I really enjoyed about Banner is the way, just as you described, she takes something that's familiar to all of us, and yet doesn't make it in any way foreign, makes it, I think, more deeply appreciated by weaving in other
Right.
familiarities.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And you
She
hear
had
snippets.
yes.
You hear like if you didn't know what the piece was called, you didn't know what it was about, you'd be like, wait, I mean, you hear little snippets of the Star Spangled Banner. It's like, da dee da da da, or dum pa da ba ba ba. You hear just little things, and so it's very familiar, yet it spins it in a very interesting way, I think.
Before we move on to our next work, I came across a quote from Jessie Montgomery that I found very intriguing. She said that music challenges me to make clear the things I do not understand.
Wow.
And isn't that a lovely way to approach our own encounters with music? I found that to be very, very
Yeah,
compelling.
she is a great voice. I mean, she's a unique voice, as I often say. Each composer really finds their voice, and I mean, it's such an interesting combination of things, and it's not just trendy. It's unique and sophisticated, but understandable. I think she's a really great composer, and many people do. And she's like like has commissions for the next 10 years. I mean, she's a very very busy composer, and it's good for her.
Yes. And well, we're going to hear from then another wonderful American composer, George Walker,
Right.
who was born to an immigrant parent in Washington, D.C., which is a great American story to start out with, right? And I don't know, I didn't want to put you on the spot with a trivia question, but he shares a middle name with another favorite composer of ours, Mozart. He was born George Theophilus Walker, and
Wow.
Theophilus is the Greek version of Amadeus, which itself was the Latin version of Gottlieb, which was Mozart's middle name.
Right. Right. Wow.
So,
That I didn't know.
yeah. And well, anyway, another great American composer, and another first time hearing for us in the Quad Cities of a very important work. Um, Tell us a little bit about the piece that we're going to be hearing as we introduce ourselves to George Walker.
Well, it's in a way, I mean, it's early in his career, and he changed his language a bit later on. It's called Lyric for Strings, and it's in memoriam to his grandmother. And so he was a young student. I think either had just graduated from Curtis, or was even. I think he had just graduated, and so he was out in the world, kind of making his own way. And this was just I'm pretty sure it's his grandmother that who passed away, like when he was 24, 25. And it's just beautiful and soulful, and you can hear Mahler in it. You can hear, you can, but it just uses the sound, the inherent beauty of sound of the strings. I mean, it's not, and he writes in the notes that when describing the piece, I mean, it is not a complicated piece, nor is it meant to be. You know, it's ABA, very straightforward. You know, there's a beautiful melody, and then he just kind of varies it a bit. I mean, it is not meant to be complicated. It's meant to be from the heart. Some of his later music was very complicated, and you know, this is one of his most often played works, I think. It's 5 minutes long, 6 minutes long, and you know, a very again, for audiences, extremely approachable, extremely heartfelt, but not well known. And so, you know, to have the opportunity with all the Beethoven we're doing to introduce our audiences to two African American composers, again, that because of the changes we made in the program, it's just an incredibly welcome opportunity to do things that had we more concerts, you know, that we'd be doing all the time. And so to be able to make that change was really gratifying for me, and I know for the audience it will be as well for the audience.
Well, interesting career that I think he had. He really started to make his career as a performer, and had done a European tour and was gaining a lot of buzz about that. And then he took on a teaching position at Dillard. And here's a little bit of the old Quad Cities connections. After Hurricane Katrina, Augustana paired with Dillard, which is a historically Black college in Louisiana, using the link of the Mississippi River. So several Dillard students pursued their studies here at Augustana after the
Oh,
hurricane.
wow. Wow.
Yeah, and after a time at Dillard, he became the first African American to complete the DMA program at Eastman, and just a phenomenal career.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful to you.
Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yes.
Prize, right.
Yeah, and again, very grateful because you've done a great job in bringing commissions here to the Quad Cities, but it's also very exciting when you can expose us to works that we've not heard before. So, well, now we're going to shift over to that fella that we talked about before, Herr Beethoven. Right. Yeah, guten Tag, Herr Beethoven. Yeah, well, I should have said that louder. I don't think you could hear me. So, two really intriguing works. The Coriolan Overture, we'll start with that. I mean, that was, you referenced this before, that was a commission for his patron, Prince Lobkowitz, who was a tremendous support for Beethoven, even when Beethoven would behave incorrigibly.
Right.
But tell us a little bit about this
Well,
work.
okay, so yeah, because of the size of the orchestra, and because you know, the early Beethoven works are for smaller orchestra, and then kind of the middle Beethoven works like the Violin Concerto, the Fifth Symphony, are for a little bit bigger orchestra with trombones, with piccolo. For, you know, it's actually tricky to find a representative piece of the middle period. You know, the Symphony No.1 sounds, I mean, it sounds like Beethoven, but it comes out of the Haydn tradition. What's different about Coriolan and this middle Beethoven is now we have Beethoven wanting to tell a story through music, or want to portray heroism, wanting to portray lofty things through music. And this was a relatively new idea. I mean, nobody, like, it was for this play Coriolan, but like I guess there was a Shakespeare version later on.
Very different. Very
different. Exactly. And so this Coriolan, like, didn't go. I mean, I think it didn't do well, and like I think they resurrected it just so they could play the overture, or if I'm remembering. Anyway, but the challenge for Beethoven, kind of as spiritually and artistically, was to create, like I said, this idea of heroism with an orchestral essay. And so the idea of that is new. And so, you know, it's full of power. It's full, you know, Coriolan's mother, I think, asked him to. Anyway, there are two very distinct characters, and there's a loving question, and it gets, you know, it gets more, it raises up with a key structure, so it gets more and more intense each time. I mean, the structure is very clearly based on theater and less based on sonata allegro form or rondo form, or it's so the form is based on a concept. And so this is a new thing for Beethoven. Later on, I mean, with Leonora and the operas and Egmont, I mean, the idea of the heroic overture, he grew into. But this is kind of the beginnings of that, and so is a unique creature, and for a relatively small orchestra. I mean, it's for the same size orchestra as the First Symphony. It's a very different aesthetic than the symphony, and that's kind of the point, to get one of those Beethoven overtures in there, because we can't fit it in other places in the season, and so that was an added bonus, actually.
Well, and just so you know, just the distinction there, I studied German in college, and so we read Coriolan, but because I grew up in the Quad Cities, I had the Genesius Guild, and Don Wooten put me into Shakespeare's Coriolanus. I think I
Right.
was spear carrier number 3, far left state, whatever.
Right.
But reading the journal, it's. I was expecting something like Coriolanus,
Right.
nothing at all. It's a
Right.
different
Exactly.
plot.
Right. Right.
Coriolanus is a masterwork, but anyway.
Right. Right, but Coriolan isn't, from what I understand. I mean, I
It's
haven't
not.
read it.
It's
Right.
not, but like every great thing, it's worth reading, right?
Right.
Just to
And well, it's famous now. It's more famous because of Beethoven
exactly,
than for
exactly.
whoever the author was, who I can't remember.
So, and I don't either. I'm sure
Right.
my
It's not. I
professor
mean,
is
it's obviously not Schiller, but
downgrading that grade again, just one more time.
right.
So, okay, let's talk about the First Symphony. So he was 26 when he wrote this, and one description, I think it's the one in the program book, that the music was as exuberant and challenging as he was at 26.
Right. Exactly. I mean, exuberant is the great word for it. Right. I mean, think ideas are just popping out all over, and I mean, it's within the classical form that he learned from Haydn, and that he studied from Mozart. He didn't study with Mozart, but he certainly knew Mozart symphonies and the piano concerti. But it's a whole. So it's the perfect combination. In Masterworks III, we're going to hear the Eroica Symphony, which is the one that changed the world. But with the first and the second symphonies, we're like, and actually the difference between the first and second is gigantic as well, as far as the difference in expression and the depth and things. I mean, he's just dipping his toe, but it's Beethoven's toe, and so it speaks again with the exuberance, with the bumptiousness, with with whatever words you want to call it, that is so uniquely Beethoven. And so, I mean, you couldn't mistake it for anybody else. But I mean, maybe you could. Like, if you really didn't know, like the second movement. Well, that could be a Mozart. That could be like a late Mozart symphony, maybe. If you. And so he takes all of the classical tools that he's been given and that he taught, and that he grew up with, and now kind of makes it his own. And so it's a very interesting work.
Well, and it's noteworthy. He premiered this at one of his benefit concerts. Today we think of a benefit being, say, for flood relief or something. No, he did these to benefit himself as the composer.
That's how it worked when you.
That's how it worked, right?
Right.
So, but in this first one, he had works from many other composers, including Mozart. So, I mean, I think that says something about where he was then. Whereas his later benefit concerts would be nothing but Beethoven for like 5 hours.
Right.
That sort of a thing.
Well, I mean, he had established a reputation by then. I mean, his reputation at age 25 was as a pianist.
Yes.
And not as a composer. He was, a virtuoso pianist, and a pianist who played so expressively that people wept. And this was new. I mean, to have someone who was so expressive on the keyboard. And so that was his claim to fame. And so there was always a piano improvisation. People would yell out this tune or that tune, happy birthday, or whatever, and then he'd improvise on it, and so his fame was as a performer. And then, of course, as his compositions got better known, and as he got more and more deaf, he was not able to perform as much, and so it morphed. And I mean, it's again that the perfect storm of life events and health events and everything for him to develop into the incomparable artist that he became.
Well, and hopefully this will be a teaser for a later concert conversation. We can share the story of his piano duel with Daniel Stiebelt, where Lobkowitz was betting on Beethoven, and Lichnowsky, who was another great noble family, were betting on this other guy who was supposed to be the greatest pianist. and Beethoven just shredded him. I mean,
I'm
and the
sure.
guy
Right.
left Vienna and
Right.
literally never came back to Vienna after
Wow.
that. But
Wow.
I do have another story, though, for you and I today. By
Yes.
your leave, I found a great description from a musician who played under Beethoven, who wrote about his conducting style. And just briefly, he said that when he, Beethoven, then observed that players would enter into his intentions and play together with increasing ardor, inspired by the magical power of his creations, his face would be transfigured with joy, all his features beaming pleasure and satisfaction, a pleased smile playing around his lips, and a thundering bravi tutti. But when things went to pieces, particularly in the scherzos of his symphonies, at a sudden and unexpected change of rhythm, he would shout with laughter and say he had expected nothing else, but was reckoning on it from the beginning. He was almost childishly glad that he had been successful in, as he put it, unhorsing such excellent riders.
Right. No, I mean, it's funny because when there are turns like that, and especially if you're with a young, less experienced orchestra, like the kids will fall into the drums, like just what Beethoven wanted you to do, exactly. I mean, that's the point. That's the point. To try and throw the rider, exactly.
Well,
So,
and I think it speaks to a very collegial and respectful relationship. And it seems to me, as I get to sort of watch from the side of the stage, that there's something, a very similar dynamic with you and the members of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, just immense respect for one another and collegiality. And so just a question, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about COVID, as little as possible, but how do you manage to sustain that magic? And I attribute it to your leadership, but in times of COVID, when you can't be that physically uh, proximate with one another.
well, I mean, I mean, just from a logistical standpoint, of course, being far apart makes it harder to play together. There's just no question about that. But these guys are so good at what they do, and more importantly, they're so committed to the art of music. It's like we're so happy to be together, creating something. I mean, the last thing we did together, Riverfront Pops, of course, which was a big, big success. But prior to that was the Verdi Requiem in like the first weekend of March. And so, we miss each other artistically. We nurture each other and support each other. And now to play great American works, to play Beethoven together, I mean, it's I mean, just like for our audience, I mean, it's food for our souls. And so, it is. I mean, hopefully, I inspire them. For sure, they inspire me. The music inspires all of us. The challenges inspire us to overcome things that like are absurd. I mean, conducting in a mask, playing in a mask. I mean, but that's the reality, and that's the reality that we all gladly accept. In order to keep each other healthy, to keep our audience healthy, and to be able to provide art. If there's ever a time we need art, this is the time. And so, I mean, there are other orchestras who kind of packed it in, and I'm very proud to say we're not one of them. And that yes, I mean, of course, there are compromises that we all make. There's shorter rehearsal time. We're spread out. The audience is, I mean, yes, there are all these things, but nevertheless, there's still art, and there's still Beethoven, and there's still Jessie Montgomery and George Walker.
And the feeling of being there at Pops, and just how wonderfully compliant everyone was. We had respect for each other as audience members and for our beloved symphony, and so we're expecting that soon. Another reality we have to deal with is the clock, and I'm afraid we're running out of time. I do want to thank you, Maestro, for so generously sharing your time with us. Thanks too to Chris Connolly of Wells Fargo Advisors for generous support of the Concert Conversation series. But I know we're all looking forward to a wonderful time. Maestro, thank you so much.
A great pleasure. Yeah, it's great to see you, and I can't wait for the concert. I really can't.
Thank you. We'll see you all soon.